Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel, Powerful Perspectives. I'd like to talk to you today about the purpose of life a little bit. It's one of those questions that gets thrown around in philosophy, gets thrown around in religion. I'm going to approach it today a little bit from a Christian standpoint. More particularly, I come from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's my religious background. And so that's kind of the perspective that I will see things through. But I think a lot of the points and like the reflections or insights or thoughts or perspectives that I would share can be maybe applied to a more general Christian audience as well. Oftentimes within the context of my church, or the church that I attend, that I subscribe to, we describe the purpose of life in a few different ways. We say that one of the purposes of life was to gain a mortal body, like a physical body. That's something that we didn't have as spirits living in heaven before we came to this earth. It was one thing that we believe God the Father had, but that we didn't have. And so that's part of the reason why we had to come to earth, is to gain a physical mortal body. Another part of the reason why this mortal life was important or necessary was to gain experiences, to learn things that we couldn't learn in heaven, and in a couple different ways for a couple different reasons, right? There are some types of experiences that you can only learn through having a physical body. Things as like the concept of sickness, the concept of death, and not just the concept of these. I think we understood these conceptually as spirits before coming here, but we didn't understand them like experientially, right? There was no way for us to. Being immortal spirits, the concept of death was really obscure to us. We could understand it logically, maybe, but what that actually means experientially, we had no clue, right? And so certain experiences and lessons that come through the experience of having a mortal body, that was important. And those were parts of, or that was kind of one side or one type of lesson or experience that we were to learn and to gain here on earth. Another is just separation from God, right? There were certain experiences, certain lessons that needed to be learned without having God and Jesus Christ and all of those heavenly reminders, all of that context there readily available for us, right? Having a veil of forgetfulness put over us so that we don't remember to a large extent, or perhaps to any extent for many of us, that premortal realm. And we have to operate on principles of faith and hope, and we need to kind of fumble around and figure things out without that sure knowledge, without that tangible evidence and kind of context surrounding us, right? So just that different environment in which to learn and to make decisions without that physical constant reminder of responsibility, where we have to be our own judges, we have to be our own agents, and we don't have that constant reminder around us. We kind of have to provide that for ourselves, right? All of that is different, and all of that provides the context and environment for different lessons and experiences that we couldn't have gained, again, in that premortal realm. But in considering all of this, there's kind of a catchphrase that gets thrown around sometimes. It's maybe not as common now as it used to be, but you still hear it from time to time. And that is that this time on earth is for us to prove ourselves, and to prove ourselves in some way, maybe to God. And that is a thought that I would like to maybe challenge and discuss here a little bit. I agree wholeheartedly that this time on earth is a time of probation. It's a time to prove ourselves. But I think we need to be really clear about who we're proving ourselves to. We are not here on earth to prove ourselves to God, because ultimately there's nothing to prove to Him. if we think of him as an omniscient being who knows us perfectly, who knows everything, who knows what we are thinking, knows what we are doing, knows what we plan to do, knows what we will do in a certain circumstance or situation, he knows all of this. He knows us intimately and perfectly, and in many ways he knows us better than we know ourselves. And so if we take that seriously and consider that he knows all of this already, it makes no sense to claim that we need to prove or show anything to him. It's not for him. It's for us. I agree that this life is a test. Certainly it's a test, but as with any test, the test doesn't test the teacher. It tests the student. And so, I mean, well, okay, there might be some, I don't know, there's some exceptions or I don't know, I grew up in Canada where we had EQAO testing, which is like this kind of standardized, I don't know if it's, I would imagine it's provincial because education is provincially based. But it was like the standardized test that is basically just to see like where the students on large are, right? And so in some ways, yes, there are evaluations for teachers to see whether or not the teachers are performing their function and responsibility as a teacher and living up to expectations and meeting requirements for educating our rising generations. But such isn't the case with God. He doesn't need to be evaluated. He's perfect. And so the ones who really are being tested is us. And yes, we can say in some ways that God is evaluating our performance. But again, I think that borders on that thought or that assumption that we need to somehow show him something that he already knows. I think more than anything, we are evaluating ourselves and in some ways evaluating each other. And we can talk about that in a minute, maybe about how productive or helpful that is or isn't. But more than anything, ideally, we should be testing ourselves. We should be proving things to ourselves. I think this time on earth is an opportunity for us to really discover ourselves and get to know ourselves and become a lot more self-reflective, a lot more self-aware, a lot more self-conscious, a lot more purposeful about the things that we do and why we do them. It's an opportunity for us to learn accountability, to learn how to take responsibility for things, to learn how not to farm out or attempt to farm out responsibility for what happens or doesn't happen in our lives, right? With the gift of agency, the freedom to make choice and to make decisions in our lives, comes also the responsibility of accountability for those choices, right? And I think oftentimes we are tempted to explain that away. We're tempted to kind of use our circumstances or someone else's actions to kind of rationalize or explain away our choices. Well, yeah, I hit him because he yelled at me and made me mad, or I stole that because I didn't have it myself and I needed it, or whatever. Like we use circumstances, we use other people's actions, we use a lot of external forces or circumstances or our environment to justify in many ways our choices, instead of looking inward and really taking that personal accountability and justifying our actions through our own agency, through our own accountability, through our own responsibility to be the authors of our own lives and of our own actions, to really take that upon ourselves. So I think really this is maybe the shift that needs to happen in many of our lives, in many of our minds, in terms of not just accountability, but in terms of our perspective of really who we are proving things to. And if we take that seriously, as in this life is an opportunity for us to prove ourselves to ourselves, then I think our outlook and our perspective on life changes quite a bit. And the way that we live our lives changes quite a bit, because what we do is for ourselves. And I don't mean that in a selfish, egoistic kind of way, like I'm out to get everything for myself. Like, I'm not talking here about capitalism or anything like this. I'm talking really about self-awareness and self-discipline, and taking our own selves, our own personalities, our own characters, our own weaknesses and strengths, the development of our own identities and personhood, who we are developing and becoming, like developing into and becoming as individuals, as human beings, taking that as a personal responsibility and taking it seriously, and being active and critical and not necessarily analytical, but really like paying attention to it, right? Being focused on that and taking that seriously, being focused on ourselves, being curious, being creative, being critical with ourselves, and holding ourselves accountable for our actions, our desires, our thoughts, and for the person that we're becoming and how we're growing, taking that growth, taking that journey, taking it seriously and taking it as a personal responsibility, and being accountable to ourselves, proving it to ourselves, testing ourselves. I think that's a whole different outlook on life than to say, oh, I'm proving myself to God. I'm proving myself to my parents. I'm proving myself to my teachers. I'm proving myself to my employer. I'm proving myself to my friends. We live in a world and in a society, especially I'm talking here like in Western or Westernized society especially, where competition is huge and where image is really important. And this idea of just comparing ourselves to those around us and how we present ourselves and how we measure up to other people, and what value system we use to evaluate ourselves against other people. Like, all of that is really, it's really complicated, it's really involved, it's really important, it's really focused on and stressed and pushed. It's there in the media that we consume, it's on social media, it's on billboards, like everywhere you look, you're being told about how you're supposed to be and about what should be valued within society and what shouldn't be. And a lot of it is a debate. There's a lot of conflict about what the ideal person looks like, and what really are characteristics and traits that are valuable versus not. And I think it's something that's important to talk about. It's something that we don't talk about nearly often enough. It just kind of happens, and it's kind of like this subliminal undertone that just kind of colors how we live and interact with each other. But how often we actually pick it apart and question it, maybe a little bit less often than we probably should, and then would be beneficial for us. But again, if we take that perspective and just kind of shift it to ourselves and say, you know what, the one that I'm accountable to is myself. And that doesn't mean that ethics and morals are subjective. It doesn't mean that I can do whatever I want, and if anyone else doesn't like it, I mean, that's their problem. No, like, we still need to be conscious of other people and interacting with them and being respectful and decent, kind, loving, caring human beings. There needs to be that mutual respect. But in terms of our value system and in terms of what standards we live up to, or what we are trying to accomplish, and what our goals are, who we want to be, who we're focusing on developing into and becoming, that is a very personal journey. And doing it for the sake of other people, I think in many ways is cheating ourselves of the experience that it was intended and meant to be. And it's also an attempt, I think, at farming out responsibility, and farming out opportunity as well, honestly, because if you assign someone else as your evaluator, as the person who gives you feedback on whether what you are doing or not doing is okay or meets expectations or not, as long as we farm that out, then the job and the tasks and the exercises or processes that are done or accomplished by that party, by that person who's like evaluating, that's lost, right? If you think about the process of just being aware of yourself and being critical and looking over, I mean, we'll take this as like a metaphor of like a test, right? So you have a test with different questions and different answers. Some of the questions might be true or false, like is this right or not? Some questions might be multiple choice. So you have to choose among a variety of answers. Sometimes questions are like short answer or like essay questions, right? Where you have to like really express yourself and dig deep and kind of share your points, your thoughts, your opinions about something. And those are a lot more subjective in terms of how they are graded, right? So take that as kind of like a metaphor, and then think about how that transfers onto then thoughts, behaviors, personal development, personal growth. If that is then the test, and we have someone else who's evaluating it, then someone else is telling us what the right answers are. Someone else is telling us what our performance is worth. Someone else is telling us this is right, this is wrong, this is worth this many points, this is worth this many. And we just take that as our mark, and we go on with our lives. I think most people, like, again, to jump back to the test, most students who get a test back with their grade on it, they just kind of accept that grade for what it is. Occasionally there might be a student who says, well, hey, I thought I did better. I thought I answered this correctly, or you marked this as wrong, but from what I know it's correct, or whatever. There might be some, like, it happens from time to time, you know, where students will kind of discuss their grade with the teacher and kind of try to negotiate a little bit there. But more often than not, the student just takes the mark, sees it, internalizes it, and says, okay, and moves on with their life. And they take that as the definitive answer. And what happens then? There's a lack of curiosity. There's a lack of learning, because you kind of just put a, I don't know, you put a stamp on that on that evaluation, right? Like, that job is done and you just move on. You accept it and you move on. But if you do it yourself, if you evaluate and mark your own work, all of a sudden you have to shift perspectives. You have to shift your focus. You have to think in a different way. You're no longer thinking as the person who wrote these things or who answered these questions. Ideally not. You're thinking from a different perspective, and you're looking at it kind of from the outside, ideally. If you're able to kind of step out of your own perspective and your own way of seeing things, then you see it in a different way, and you gain insights maybe that you wouldn't have gained otherwise. And so that experience, the experience of seeing things differently, of being critical about your own performance, about your own answers, your own decisions, your own thoughts, your own opinions or arguments or whatever, looking at those from a different perspective and being critical of them and observing them and examining them and reflecting on them. That whole thing is a process, and it's a valuable process that leads to additional insight and growth and learning. Like, there's so much richness that comes from that we're losing out on if we farm that out, if we kind of assign that responsibility to someone else and let someone else do that for us. So yeah, I would encourage us to be conscious of that and to take active part in that process ourselves, because there's a lot to gain from it. One more little addition to this before I go, before I end the video for today. In terms of writing things down, I remember there was a leader of my church, I think one of the apostles in our religion, who was talking about writing things down. He was talking about spiritual impressions, spiritual experiences, like inspirations or things that are just spiritually significant to us. And he said that by writing those things down, we show God how important it is to us. That by recording in some way, by recording those experiences, by recording those thoughts, those impressions, those feelings, whatever, it's a way of us to show God that we value and appreciate what he's giving us. I agree. I don't mean to like to contradict an apostle. I agree with what was said completely. It is one way that we show God how important it is to us. But I would take this a step further and just kind of ask, well, does God need to be shown how important it is to us? Does God need to be shown how much we value it or not? Does he not know this already? I would submit or suggest that writing these things down, recording these things, journaling, whatever form it takes, right? Like recording impressions, feelings, thoughts, experiences that are spiritually significant or emotionally significant, like it's an important practice. But I would argue that the importance doesn't necessarily come from God or from showing God something so much as it comes from showing it to ourselves. Because again, God already knows. I would suggest that we are the ones who don't know as much. I would suggest that writing these things down, yes, it's a way of showing God how much we value them and appreciate them. But it's also a way of showing ourselves how much we value and appreciate them. And in my personal opinion, I think that's even more valuable and even more important for us to prove that to ourselves, for us to show that to ourselves, because we're the ones who doubt it, right? We're the ones who forget. And we're the ones who tend to mistake this. Oftentimes we will tell ourselves that we care about things that we really don't. And the other way around. We lie to ourselves all the time, often without recognizing it or noticing it. Sometimes it happens consciously, sometimes it happens kind of subconsciously or preconsciously, like for the psychoanalysts out there who don't like the word subconscious, they prefer preconscious. But sometimes there's some level of awareness that, okay, like I'm telling myself this because I'm trying to avoid something else, right? Like there's a feeling, there's an inkling, there's something that doesn't quite match up, but I don't really want to pay that attention. It's uncomfortable. I don't want to admit that to myself, whatever it is. Or maybe it's just not accepted within a certain sphere, and so I need to present myself a certain way to fit in here. Whatever the reason, we lie to ourselves pretty constantly, sometimes consciously, but pretty consistently. We tend to lie to ourselves, whether we mean to or not, about how we feel about things and about what we think and about what is important to us and what isn't, and what we value and what we don't. And again, like I'm not saying this to be overly critical or to be judgmental. I think it's, again, like really understandable that especially within the climate, within a climate like a culture where values are really contended, and where there's so many different powers, so many different companies, influences, opinions, prerogatives, and to be honest, there's a lot of agendas and prerogatives and what's the word I'm looking for here? There's another one. But anyway, there's just a lot of people who want to sell a certain idea of what should be valued and what shouldn't be. I mean, it's the whole basis of advertising, right? Like that's what advertisers get paid to do, is to prove to you or show to you or convince you of the value of something, right? Something that you may not originally think that you need, something that you may not have originally value, but they're trying to convince you that you should value it, right? This happens all the time. Take any product or service, and it needs to be communicated, it needs to be disseminated somehow. And you need to find a clientele, and you need to find people who will be interested in purchasing your service or your product. And sometimes the advertising strategy is to focus on those who are already interested in that thing, and you advertise and you promote to that market that's already there. Sometimes you're trying to create a market, right? Sometimes you're trying to convince people who normally wouldn't think that they need this, that they also need it. Because, I mean, if you think about it, if you're able to access and change the minds of people who originally wouldn't have considered it as a need or as an interest, and you're able to show them somehow, convince them somehow that they need this thing, that just opens even more doors to potential clientele. And so this is happening all around us. And this is just one example. Like advertising is just one example of people telling us what we should think or what we should believe or what should be valuable to us, right? I mean, we can go into politics, we can go into different religious denominations as well in terms of like offering value systems and what should be important. Like there's so many different groups of people, different agencies, different organizations, different forces and factors, and that contribute to telling us what we should value. And so it makes sense to me why we would be confused about this, and why there would be contention, why there would be this back and forth, and this debate, this contention about what we value and what we don't. And it makes sense why there might even be personal confusion, like why we would be confused ourselves about what we value and what we don't. But I think that's really where the confusion is, right? It's personal. We are the ones who aren't as clear oftentimes on what is true and what isn't, what we actually feel versus what we don't, what we actually think versus what we don't, what is actually important to us versus what isn't. Whether our actions are consistent with our words, right? If our beliefs and what we think, we feel is actually consistent with how we act, right? These discrepancies, they're on us. They aren't there with God. Like God knows the truth. He isn't confused about any of this. He doesn't really have any doubt in these areas. It's we who do. And so I would contend that by writing these things down that are important to us, by thinking actively about what is important and what isn't, by doing things that kind of show or demonstrate that we value something, I would say it's even more of a demonstration or a proof to ourselves than it is to God. And I would say that by association, or kind of building off of that, it's even more valuable to us personally than it is to God. So take that for what it's worth. Think on it. Give me your thoughts and your opinions in the comments below, and I'll look forward to talking to you next time.